Hey, it's Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. I've received this question countless times from aspiring producers and sample-based beat makers over the years. How do I find the key of a sample? You may be working on a sampled beat, you want to add a bass line, you want to add your own supporting instrumentation, or even matching the key of a completely separate sample. In this video, I'm going to explain and demonstrate my process for how to find the key of a sample. I first want to preface this by saying that there are a multitude of ways to achieve this. There are third-party plugins, native plugins, standalone applications of software that can analyze your audio and spit out a key for you automatically. If that's what you're interested in, a quick plug-and-play tool that will analyze the audio and do that work for you, I'm going to mention one towards the end of the video that's been recommended, as well as some other resources. And if you have your own process, your own plugin or software or procedure for finding a key of a sample, leave it in the comments, share it, because there are multiple ways to make this happen. And so if another producer or beat maker can take your process and apply that and it works for them, then great. But in this video, I'm going to be showing you the process that I go through. To give you some quick context before we jump into the process, I was playing piano prior to ever making beats. I was going to a regular weekly lesson with an instructor, like a formal sit down, learning keys, scales, chords, probably 2 to 3 years prior to ever making an instrumental, learning technique, learning how to play music. I was playing classical. I was really into like Bach and Beethoven and sit down to read sheet music. So all that knowledge and foundation in theory carried over as I started making beats. And I say that not to imply that you have to take a formal lesson or follow the same path that I took to get to where you want to be with your music, but more so that the more you know, the more information and knowledge you have on music theory, composition, and at the basic level, just knowing keys, scales, relative minor, majors, the better off you're going to be moving forward as a whole with your music, and in particular in a process like this where we're actually trying to find the key of a sample. Okay, so to give you a direct example of how I would approach finding the key of a sample, I have an 8-bar sample sequence loaded. This is pulled from an earlier session. You can apply this process to the original sample. If you want to just drag in the audio and work like that, you can do it. The reason why I create a sample sequence first and then worry about finding the key is because a lot of times I will adjust the pitch, and so I'm changing the key as I'm working with the sample sequence and creating it. So if I keep changing it, I'm going to have to go back and reevaluate the key at the end anyway. So I usually just save that to once I have the sample sequence created. So I'll loop this sample sequence up, let you hear what it sounds like, and then we will get into finding the key. So my first step is to load in some sort of an instrument. It really doesn't matter. Usually I pick a piano. It's pretty versatile. So I'm just picking an Ableton Live instrument. You can use whatever you have in your sound collection. So I'm going to play the sample sequence back. While I'm playing this back, I'm going to be triggering different piano keys and listening specifically for notes that fit within the scale. Notes that sound sour, they probably are not included in the scale. So anything that sounds good harmonically with the sample sequence that I have are notes that I'm going to pay attention to, and from that I'm going to infer and try to decipher what key it's in. Okay, so that sounds right. Sour. So I know that these first 5 notes sound right with the context of this sample. Now, depending on your background in theory, I know that this is E minor. Minor natural scale, harmonic minor, raise the 7th. The reason I know it's minor is because it's got a dark feel to it. If it was an E major, it would be like a happy sound. And then from there, you can also look up chord progressions. If you want to look at E minor chord progressions, you can say, okay, E minor now goes together with an A minor, inversion goes together with a B major. Something else that can happen depending on a lot of other variables, your source of your samples, if they're being recorded from vinyl, a lot of different things, is that if you feel like you're playing all of the notes on the scale and none of them seem like they're matching with the key of the sample, sometimes what can happen is that your sample is a little sharp or a little flat, and so it may need detuned. Really, the detune is really an incremental setting in between half steps. So the transpose will take you from C to C sharp to D to D sharp to E, an increment like that in between keys. But if you ever think the sample may be a little sharp or flat, then you may want to experiment with the detune. In Ableton, it's in the pitch oscillation tab of the sampler. That option will be available pretty much in whatever DAW that you're using. So that in a nutshell is my process. I'm trying to match notes from that scale of the sample that work together, and then from that infer the key. I also want to give you a more plug and play option like I mentioned I would. This is basicmusictheory.com. This is not the tool, but this is a website you can reference, and I've talked about in my piano tips for BEATMAKER series as well. You can put in any keys, scales, chords. It'll show you all the information. This is not the only site, of course, you can find. There's tons of other websites out there. This is just one that came up. This is a tool called Key Finder, and I only saw this, I've never used this personally, but it was recommended by a Machine Master's video that I will also link in the description that goes into more detail on some other stuff as well. MG The Future did a really good video on matching keys from different samples, and so it covers, kind of overlaps and covers a lot of this same stuff. And so he recommended this Key Finder tool, and he shows you in that video also how to use it, import your sample, and to get the information of what key. I don't have any direct experience with it, but he seemed to find it beneficial and useful. So I'll link that in the description if you want to check it out. And I'll also link all the other resources that I mentioned. If you like this video, if it was helpful at all, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If not, feel free to give it a thumbs down. If you're new, if you like this type of content, I'm uploading new videos every week. Tutorials, beat making videos, production tips, instrumentals. Everything is organized on the channel in playlists, so feel free to drop a sub. Thanks again for watching, and happy beat making.